The camera pans across a glittering ballroom, chandeliers reflecting golden light onto the polished marble floor. The sound of champagne glasses clinking and faint laughter fills the air. Suddenly, a confident voice echoes through the microphone. "Tonight, we celebrate success, but we also reveal the truth." The spotlight shifts to a stunning woman on the stage, her gaze sharp and unwavering. The room falls silent, and all eyes turn to a man in the crowd. His expression flickers between confusion and dread as whispers ripple through the guests. Who is she, and what truth is she about to reveal? Before we uncover the shocking secrets behind this glamorous New Year's Eve party, make sure to subscribe to our channel. This is just the beginning of an unforgettable story you don't want to miss. Hit the bell so you're the first to know how this dramatic night unfolds. The Grand Manhattan Hotel stood tall against the cold December sky, its sleek glass exterior glowing with the warm hues of the city's festive lights. Inside its grand ballroom, a symphony of opulence unfolded. Crystal chandeliers cast a shimmering light across the room, illuminating tables adorned with white linen, golden cutlery, and elegant floral centerpieces. The hum of conversation mixed with the soft melodies of a live jazz band, creating a sophisticated atmosphere that invited New York's elite to revel in the promise of a new year. Joshua Prescott entered the room with practiced ease, a faint smile gracing his sharp features. His tailored black tuxedo fit perfectly, a silent testament to his wealth and taste. As the heir to one of the country's most prominent restaurant empires, Joshua was accustomed to being the center of attention. Guests turned their heads as he passed, greeting him with polite nods, admiring smiles, or whispered comments. For most, Joshua appeared the embodiment of success, young, charismatic, and effortlessly charming. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay the weight of a turbulent year. Risky investments had left his finances precarious, a secret he had carefully hidden from all but a few. Clarissa Dane stood by the bar, watching him. Her dark evening gown clung to her frame, exuding elegance, but her sharp eyes betrayed an intensity that few noticed. As Joshua's business partner and longtime confidant, Clarissa knew more about his troubles than anyone else in the room. She sipped her champagne thoughtfully, her lips curving into a faint smirk. Joshua greeted a group of prominent guests with his signature confidence, exchanging pleasantries and indulging in their small talk. They discussed market trends, upcoming ventures, and philanthropy, the language of the wealthy. He laughed at the appropriate moments and offered insights with ease, yet every interaction felt increasingly hollow. Clarissa approached as the group began to disperse, her smile as polished as the diamond necklace adorning her neck. "You're quite the star tonight," she said smoothly, her voice low and laced with amusement. "Everyone's hanging on your every word, as usual." Joshua glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Isn't that the point of these events?" he replied lightly. "Indeed," she said, tilting her head. "Though I wonder if they'd be as captivated if they knew everything." Her words lingered in the air, a subtle jab cloaked in civility. Joshua's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. The two shared a complicated history. Clarissa had been instrumental in expanding their restaurant empire, and her sharp business acumen was undeniable. Yet, over time, her ambition had begun to eclipse her loyalty. Joshua often wondered whether she saw him as a partner or an obstacle. Around them, the evening progressed. Waiters moved gracefully through the crowd, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres and refilling glasses of champagne. Conversations ebbed and flowed, laughter punctuating the air. The jazz band transitioned into a livelier tune, encouraging a few couples to take to the dance floor. Joshua wandered to the edge of the room, seeking a moment of solitude. From here, he could observe the scene in its entirety, the glittering decorations, the well-dressed guests, the polished veneer of success. Yet he felt strangely detached, as though watching a performance rather than participating in it. His gaze settled on Clarissa again. She was speaking to a small group, her gestures animated, her presence magnetic. Whatever she was saying drew laughter and nods of agreement. Joshua's chest tightened. He knew her well enough to sense that her charm tonight carried an edge, a purpose. A waiter approached him with a fresh glass of champagne, and Joshua accepted it with a nod of thanks. As he raised the glass to his lips, he caught fragments of nearby conversations. Guests spoke in hushed tones about the state of the economy, the rise and fall of fortunes, and the ruthless nature of the business world. Joshua couldn't help but wonder how many of them suspected his own struggles. His empire, once untouchable, was now on uncertain ground. The weight of maintaining appearances felt heavier with each passing moment. Clarissa appeared at his side again, her expression unreadable. "You look lost in thought," she remarked, her voice soft enough to be private. "Just taking it all in," he replied, forcing a smile. "Careful, Joshua," she said, her tone carrying a hint of warning. "Moments like these can be revealing." Before he could respond, she moved away, her words leaving an unsettling impression. Joshua felt a flicker of unease, but he pushed it aside. The night continued, a blend of elegance and superficiality. Yet beneath the glittering facade, tension simmered. Joshua's instincts told him that this evening, so carefully curated to celebrate success and new beginnings, might not unfold as planned. The night outside the Grand Manhattan Hotel was crisp and clear, with the stars barely visible through the glow of the city's skyline. Inside, the ballroom radiated warmth and energy, the festive atmosphere masking the undercurrents of personal ambitions and hidden struggles. Joshua moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, greeting guests, shaking hands, and exchanging pleasantries. Yet, every interaction felt like a test of his composure, a reminder of the delicate line he walked. The empire his family had built was a symbol of prosperity, its name synonymous with luxury dining and exclusivity. Yet, Joshua's recent decisions had placed it in jeopardy. Months earlier, he had been drawn into a series of high-risk investments, lured by the promise of rapid expansion and unprecedented returns. The ventures had failed spectacularly, leaving his finances strained and his reputation vulnerable. He thought of the late nights spent poring over numbers, seeking a way to stabilize his empire without revealing the cracks. He had told no one but Clarissa, trusting her with the truth. At the time, she had offered measured advice, her demeanor calm and calculating. Yet her actions in recent weeks had planted seeds of doubt in his mind. Clarissa moved gracefully through the room, her presence commanding attention. She stopped to speak with influential figures, her tone polished, her expressions carefully curated. To the untrained eye, she was a loyal partner, a trusted ally. But Joshua knew her too well to miss the subtle shifts in her behavior, the moments when her gaze lingered too long on someone else, the way her smile seemed to sharpen when their conversations grew serious. He caught her eye from across the room, and for a fleeting moment, her expression softened. Then, as if remembering herself, she turned away, engaging a nearby guest in animated conversation. Joshua exhaled slowly, gripping his glass of champagne. His instincts told him that something was brewing, but he couldn't pinpoint what. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to anticipate their moves before they made them. Yet Clarissa remained an enigma, her intentions layered and elusive. He replayed their earlier exchange in his mind, searching for clues in her words, her tone. "Careful, Joshua. Moments like these can be revealing." What had she meant? Was it a warning, a threat, or something else entirely? As the band played a lively tune, Joshua wandered toward the edge of the room, seeking a reprieve from the crowd. The windows here offered a stunning view of Manhattan, the city lights stretching endlessly into the distance. He sipped his champagne, the cold glass a grounding presence in his hand. Memories surfaced unbidden, moments from his childhood when his family's empire was still small, its future uncertain. His father had built the business with relentless determination, instilling in Joshua the values of hard work and resilience. Those lessons had guided him for years, shaping him into the man he was today. Yet, somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those principles, consumed by the allure of power and prestige. Clarissa's voice broke through his thoughts. "Thinking about the good old days?" she asked, her tone light but tinged with something he couldn't quite place. Joshua turned to face her, masking his surprise at her sudden appearance. "Just enjoying the view," he replied. She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You've been quiet tonight. That's not like you." "Maybe I'm just tired," he said, attempting a smile. Clarissa studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You should be careful, Joshua, she said finally. People notice when you're not yourself. They start asking questions. Let them ask, he replied, his voice firmer than he expected. I have nothing to hide. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. We all have something to hide, she said softly before turning and walking away. Joshua watched her go, a knot forming in his stomach. Her words felt like a challenge, a reminder that the truth could be as dangerous as a lie. The night wore on, the atmosphere growing livelier as the clock inched closer to midnight. Guests mingled and danced, their laughter filling the air. Yet, beneath the surface, the tension between Joshua and Clarissa simmered, an unspoken conflict that threatened to unravel. At one point, Joshua found himself drawn into a conversation with a group of investors. They spoke enthusiastically about opportunities in emerging markets, their excitement contagious. For a moment, he allowed himself to be swept up in their optimism, imagining a future where his risks had paid off, where his empire was stronger than ever. But as the conversation shifted to cautionary tales, businesses that had crumbled under the weight of poor decisions, Joshua felt the familiar sting of doubt. He excused himself politely, retreating to the bar for another drink. Clarissa appeared beside him once more, her presence as inevitable as the night itself. Running away again, she asked, her tone teasing but with an edge of seriousness. Just taking a break, he said, setting his empty glass on the bar. You can't hide forever, Joshua, she said, her voice low. People are paying attention. They always do. I'm not hiding, he said, meeting her gaze. I'm handling things in my own way. Is that what you call it? She asked, arching an eyebrow. Handling things. Her words stung, but Joshua refused to let her see the impact. If you have something to say, Clarissa, just say it, he said evenly. She held his gaze for a moment before smiling. Not yet, she said softly. But soon. With that, she walked away, leaving Joshua to grapple with the weight of her words. As the night continued, the ballroom's grandeur seemed to blur, the laughter and music fading into the background. Joshua felt like an actor in a play, his role carefully scripted, his performance flawless. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the curtain was about to fall, revealing the truth he had fought so hard to conceal. And as he watched Clarissa move effortlessly through the crowd, her every gesture deliberate, he realized that she held the power to decide when that moment would come. The Grand Manhattan Hotel's ballroom pulsed with energy as the evening deepened. The chatter of influential guests mixed with the soft clinking of glasses and the jazz band's smooth melodies. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes, the sparkle of diamonds, and the tension that only those in the upper echelons of society could understand. Beneath the glittering surface, unseen currents of ambition and insecurity flowed through the crowd like an unspoken undercurrent. Joshua moved through the throng of guests with the grace of someone who had been raised in this world. Every smile was perfectly timed, every handshake firm and confident. But behind the mask of charisma, a storm brewed. He could feel the weight of scrutiny in the gazes that followed him. Whispers floated behind his back, subtle, polite, but unmistakably pointed. At one point, a group of prominent businessmen cornered him, their faces alight with forced cheer. They were eager to hear his thoughts on the upcoming year, the economy, and the expansion of his restaurant empire. Joshua answered smoothly, weaving vague optimism into his responses, avoiding specifics. Yet, he could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the suspicion. Tell me, Joshua, one of the men said, swirling his glass of whiskey. What's your take on the recent market shifts? Surely, someone with your experience has a unique perspective. Joshua hesitated, his mind racing. He knew the shifts they were referring to, the same ones that had gutted his investments and placed his business on the edge of disaster. But admitting that was not an option. Markets always fluctuate, he said finally, offering a practiced smile. It's about staying adaptable and prepared for opportunities when they arise. The men nodded, their expressions polite but unconvinced. As they moved on to another topic, Joshua felt his chest tighten. The cracks in his facade were growing, and it was only a matter of time before someone exploited them. From across the room, he spotted Clarissa. She stood near a group of young entrepreneurs, her laughter light, her demeanor magnetic. She had a way of commanding attention without effort, her every gesture calculated to draw people in. Joshua couldn't help but feel a pang of unease as he watched her. Clarissa had always been ambitious, but lately, her actions had taken on a sharper edge. She seemed to be positioning herself for something, though what that was remained unclear. As if sensing his gaze, she glanced over and met his eyes. For a moment, her expression softened, almost apologetic. But then her lips curved into a faint smile, one that carried no warmth. She turned back to her companions, leaving Joshua with a knot in his stomach. The evening unfolded in a blur of conversation and movement. Guests mingled, danced, and exchanged pleasantries, their polished exteriors hiding their true thoughts. Joshua moved through the crowd, his mind racing. Every interaction felt like a performance, every word carefully chosen to maintain the illusion of control. At one point, he found himself near a group of younger influencers, their enthusiasm a stark contrast to the more reserved demeanor of the older guests. They spoke of trends, social media strategies, and the importance of personal branding. It's all about authenticity, one of them said, gesturing with her glass of champagne. People can sense when you're being fake. The key is to show them who you really are. Joshua suppressed a bitter laugh. Authenticity. In this room, authenticity was a myth, a buzzword used to mask the constant game of appearances. No one here was truly authentic, not him, not Clarissa, not anyone. Clarissa approached as the group dissolved, her expression unreadable. She held a glass of champagne, her posture relaxed but poised. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Just taking it all in," Joshua replied, forcing a smile. She murmured, tilting her head. "Careful, Joshua. People notice when you're not yourself." Her words sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't the first time she had hinted at something, and he doubted it would be the last. He searched her face for answers, but her expression remained neutral, her intentions veiled. "What do you want, Clarissa?" he asked finally, his tone sharper than he intended. She smiled, a hint of amusement flickering in her eyes. "Want? I want what's best for the business, of course. Isn't that what we both want?" Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. As the night wore on, the ballroom seemed to grow smaller, the weight of the evening pressing down on Joshua. He sought refuge near the massive windows that lined one side of the room, their view of the Manhattan skyline offering a momentary escape. The city stretched out before him, its lights twinkling like distant stars. He thought of his father, of the empire they had built together. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what had been and what was at stake. Lost in thought again. Clarissa's voice broke through his reverie. He turned to find her standing beside him, her gaze fixed on the city. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. "You know," she said finally, her tone light but edged with steel, "this business isn't just about profits and losses. It's about perception. People need to believe in you, Joshua. Without that belief, everything falls apart." Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they echoed his deepest fears. "And what about you, Clarissa?" he asked, his voice quiet. "What do you believe?" She turned to face him, her expression inscrutable. "I believe in the future," she said simply. With that, she walked away, leaving Joshua alone with his thoughts. The night continued, the clock inching closer to midnight. Joshua felt the tension in the room growing, the air thick with anticipation. Yet, amidst the laughter and celebration, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The Grand Manhattan Hotel glimmered under the pale light of the city skyline, its ballroom alive with the hum of opulence and orchestrated revelry. Inside, the evening had hit its stride. Conversations grew louder as champagne flowed freely, and the jazz band's tempo quickened, enticing more guests onto the polished dance floor. Yet, in the midst of the glamour, an undercurrent of tension lingered, subtle but palpable. Joshua moved through the room like a practiced performer, his smile unwavering as he exchanged pleasantries with guests. Every nod, every laugh, every toast was perfectly timed, masking the storm of unease that churned within him. The weight of his recent financial missteps clung to him like an invisible shroud. Each time someone's gaze lingered too long or a question turned too pointed, he felt it, a pang of fear that his carefully constructed image might begin to crack. Across the room, Clarissa moved with equal precision, her steps measured, her words carefully chosen. Unlike Joshua, she seemed utterly at ease, as though she thrived in the currents of hidden truths and unspoken motives that swirled through the crowd. She wore an air of quiet control, her every gesture deliberate, her every word carrying layers of meaning. Her confidence was well-earned. Clarissa had spent weeks laying the groundwork for this evening, gathering information, making connections, and subtly shifting the balance of power. She had always been ambitious, but tonight her ambition had sharpened into something far more dangerous. It had started months earlier when she first learned of Joshua's financial troubles. The details had been revealed in hushed conversations, brief glimpses into the vulnerabilities he had tried so hard to hide. At first, she had offered her support, presenting herself as a loyal partner ready to help him navigate the storm. But as the full extent of his mistakes became clear, something shifted. Clarissa saw an opportunity. Joshua's empire, once unshakable, was teetering on the edge. She realized that with the right strategy, she could position herself as the true leader of their business, stepping out of his shadow and into the spotlight. Her plan began with whispers. She seeded doubt in the minds of key figures, dropping subtle hints about Joshua's recent decisions, framing them as reckless or short-sighted. She didn't need to outright accuse him of failure, the power of suggestion was enough. Next came the alliances. Clarissa reached out to influential investors and partners, carefully selecting those who were already dissatisfied or uncertain about Joshua's leadership. She positioned herself as the voice of reason, the steady hand capable of guiding the empire through turbulent times. By the time the New Year's Eve gala arrived, her web was nearly complete. All that remained was the final act, a public moment that would cement her position and irrevocably damage Joshua's. As the evening unfolded, Clarissa played her role perfectly. She laughed at the right jokes, shared anecdotes with the right people, and offered reassurances to those who voiced concerns. She moved between groups with the ease of a seasoned politician, her presence magnetic. Joshua, meanwhile, felt the walls closing in. He couldn't ignore the way conversations hushed as he approached, the subtle shifts in tone when his name came up. He could sense the unease, the doubts, the quiet judgment. Yet, he couldn't pinpoint the source. At one point, he found himself speaking with a group of investors who had been loyal to his family for years. Their questions were pointed, their expressions guarded. "Tell us, Joshua," one of them said, swirling his drink, "how do you plan to address the challenges ahead? The market isn't exactly forgiving these days." Joshua forced a smile, his mind racing for an answer. "Challenges are part of any business," he said evenly. "What matters is how we respond to them. I'm confident that with the right strategy, we'll not only weather the storm but come out stronger on the other side." The men exchanged glances, their expressions inscrutable. Joshua's chest tightened. He knew his response had been vague, but what else could he say? The truth, that his empire was on the brink of collapse, was not an option. From across the room, Clarissa watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. She had orchestrated this moment, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of those men long before the evening began. Now, she saw those seeds beginning to sprout. As the night wore on, Clarissa's confidence grew. She had spent years building her reputation as Joshua's loyal partner, the sharp-minded strategist behind his charismatic leadership. But tonight, she was ready to step into a new role, the one at the top. At one point, she found herself speaking with a small group of younger entrepreneurs, their energy and optimism a refreshing contrast to the guarded demeanor of the older guests. They spoke of innovation, disruption, and the power of social media, their enthusiasm contagious. "You know," one of them said, leaning in slightly, "it's fascinating how some leaders evolve with the times, while others, well, let's just say they struggle to adapt." Clarissa smiled, her expression thoughtful. Adaptability is everything in this business, she said. The key is recognizing when change is necessary and having the courage to act on it, even if it means making difficult decisions. The words hung in the air, their meaning clear. The young entrepreneurs nodded, their admiration evident. Clarissa's position as a forward-thinking leader was solidifying. Meanwhile, Joshua retreated to the edges of the room, seeking a moment of solitude. He gazed out at the city skyline, the lights of Manhattan stretching endlessly into the night. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to remember why he had started this journey in the first place, the dreams he had shared with his father, the legacy they had built together, but the memories offered little comfort. The weight of his mistakes was too great, the consequences too severe. He could feel the ground shifting beneath him, the foundation of his empire cracking. Clarissa approached him, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. Lost in thought again, she asked, her tone light but tinged with something sharper. Joshua turned to face her, masking his unease. Just enjoying the view, he said. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You should be careful, Joshua, she said softly. Sometimes, when you're too focused on the view, you miss what's happening right in front of you. Her words sent a chill through him, their meaning clear. What are you trying to say, Clarissa? He asked, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his chest. She smiled faintly, her gaze unwavering. I'm saying that change is inevitable, she said. And those who don't adapt, well, they often find themselves left behind. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Joshua to grapple with the weight of her words. As the evening continued, the tension between them grew. Joshua could sense that something was coming, something he couldn't yet define. And Clarissa, ever the strategist, moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how the night would end. The room seemed to swell with energy as midnight drew near. The champagne glasses sparkled under the cascading light of the chandeliers, and laughter rippled across the room like waves. But for Joshua, each passing moment felt heavier, a countdown not just to the new year, but to something far more ominous. The band transitioned to a lively tune, encouraging more couples to fill the dance floor. The polished marble reflected their movements, the swirl of gowns and suits creating an image of elegance. Yet, the beauty of the scene was lost on Joshua. He stood near the edge of the room, his grip on his champagne glass tightening as he watched Clarissa make her way toward the stage. There had been something different about her tonight, something sharper, more deliberate. She had always been composed, but this evening she moved with the precision of someone orchestrating an event. Every smile, every word, every glance was purposeful, as though she were playing a game only she fully understood. Joshua caught snippets of conversations around him. Guests discussed the success of the evening, praised the luxurious decor, and speculated about the surprises the night might hold. Unspoken, but palpable, was the tension in the air, a sense that something unexpected was on the horizon. Clarissa reached the stage, her presence commanding attention even before she spoke. The band concluded their piece with a flourish, and the crowd erupted in applause. As the music faded, all eyes turned to her. Joshua felt his stomach twist. Whatever she was about to say, he knew it wouldn't be good. Clarissa took the microphone, her smile radiant under the spotlight. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice warm and inviting. I hope you're all enjoying this wonderful celebration as much as I am. The crowd responded with cheers and applause. Clarissa waited a beat before continuing, her tone shifting to something more earnest. Tonight, we gather not just to welcome a new year, but to reflect on the one we're leaving behind, she said. And as we do, it's important to celebrate the people who have made it all possible, the visionaries, the leaders, the risk-takers. Joshua's heart raced as her words seemed to aim directly at him. He forced himself to maintain a neutral expression, but he could feel the heat of the spotlight inching closer. And, of course, Clarissa continued, her smile never wavering, we must also acknowledge that leadership comes with challenges. It requires courage, wisdom, and above all, accountability. The room grew quieter, the mood shifting subtly. Guests exchanged glances, sensing that the speech was moving in an unexpected direction. As many of you know, Clarissa said, her voice steady and clear, Joshua Prescott has been at the helm of our business empire for years. His charisma, ambition, and vision have brought us incredible success." The crowd applauded, though the enthusiasm was mixed with hesitation. Joshua stood frozen, unsure whether to nod in acknowledgement or shrink into the shadows, but, Clarissa said, pausing for effect, "Even the greatest leaders face moments of challenge. And tonight, I believe it's important for us to address those challenges openly, as a community." A murmur rippled through the room, curiosity and tension building. Joshua felt his breath catch. "Leadership is not about hiding from the truth," Clarissa said, her gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing squarely on Joshua. "It's about confronting it with transparency and courage. And the truth is, this past year has not been easy for our business." The murmurs grew louder, and Joshua could feel the weight of every eye in the room turning toward him. "Decisions were made," Clarissa continued, her tone still calm but now edged with steel. "Decisions that have had serious consequences. Investments that were, let's say, less than prudent." The murmurs turned into whispers, and Joshua felt a wave of heat rise to his face. He gripped his glass tighter, his mind racing for a way to respond. Clarissa's smile softened, though her words didn't. "But let me be clear," she said, raising a hand to quiet the crowd. "These challenges do not define us. They are opportunities to grow, to adapt, and to come back stronger." Her gaze flicked to Joshua, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw something like regret in her eyes. But the moment passed, and she turned her attention back to the audience. "Tonight is about new beginnings," she said, her tone lifting slightly. "And I have every confidence that, together, we will turn these challenges into triumphs." The applause was polite but subdued, the room thick with tension. Clarissa stepped down from the stage, her expression composed as she returned the microphone to its stand. Joshua felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. He forced himself to move, to keep up the appearance of control, but inside he was unraveling. Guests approached him with careful smiles and vague reassurances, their words dripping with condescension. "You've always been a fighter, Joshua," one man said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I'm sure you'll bounce back." Another offered a strained smile. "Tough year for everyone, isn't it? But you'll figure it out. You always do." Joshua nodded mechanically, his mind too clouded to form coherent responses. He caught sight of Clarissa across the room, surrounded by a small group of admirers. She looked radiant, untouchable, as though she hadn't just dismantled his reputation in front of the most powerful people in the city. Desperate for air, Joshua made his way to the edge of the room, his steps unsteady. He slipped through a side door and out onto the hotel's terrace, the cold night air hitting him like a slap. The city stretched out before him, its lights shimmering against the dark sky. He leaned against the railing, his breath visible in the frigid air. For the first time in years, he felt small, insignificant against the vastness of the city and the enormity of his failures. He thought of his father, of the empire they had built together. How disappointed would he be to see it unraveling like this? And how much of that disappointment would he direct at Joshua himself? The sound of the terrace door opening behind him broke through his thoughts. He turned to see an older man in a hotel uniform, one of the cleaning staff, pushing a cart of supplies. The man paused when he saw Joshua, his expression softening. "Evening, sir," the man said, his voice kind. "Bit chilly out here, isn't it?" Joshua nodded, unsure how to respond. The man hesitated, then stepped closer. "If you don't mind me saying, you look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." Joshua let out a bitter laugh. "Something like that," he said. The man studied him for a moment, then smiled gently. "You know, sir, I've worked here a long time. Seen a lot of folks come and go, all dressed up and looking like they've got it all. But the ones who truly have it all, they're the ones who know what really matters." Joshua frowned, his chest tightening. "And what's that?" The man's smile deepened. "Honesty. Faith. Treating people right. Those are the things that last, sir. Everything else, money, power, fancy parties, it comes and goes. The words hit Joshua like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he stood in silence, the truth of the man's words sinking in. "Thank you," Joshua said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. The man nodded, giving him a small pat on the shoulder before returning to his work. Joshua turned back to the city, his mind racing. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of resolve began to flicker. It wasn't over, not yet. He still had time to make things right. The air outside was sharp, each breath forming clouds of vapor that dissolved into the night. Joshua leaned against the wrought iron railing of the terrace, his grip tightening as he tried to ground himself. Below him, the city stretched endlessly, its lights forming a glittering web that pulsed with life. But the beauty of the skyline offered no comfort. Inside the ballroom, the party continued, the sound of jazz and laughter muffled through the thick glass doors. He could picture the scene without turning back, Clarissa basking in the attention, guests murmuring about his leadership, his failures. The humiliation was suffocating, but the cold air was helping, if only slightly. His mind raced, replaying Clarissa's speech again and again. The calculated way she had exposed him, framing his failures as an opportunity for growth while planting seeds of doubt in everyone's minds. She had done it so gracefully, so subtly, that it was almost impossible to call her out without looking defensive or petty. That he clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was how perfectly she had orchestrated it. He had trusted her, leaned on her in moments of vulnerability, and she had turned that trust into a weapon. The sound of a door creaking open broke his thoughts. Joshua turned, expecting to see another guest or perhaps one of the hotel's staff coming to check on him. Instead, it was the older man he had noticed earlier, the one pushing a cleaning cart. The man hesitated in the doorway, his hand resting on the handle of the cart. "Sorry to bother you, sir," he said, his voice gentle. "Didn't realize anyone was out here." Joshua shook his head. "You're not bothering me." The man gave him a small smile and stepped onto the terrace, letting the door close behind him. He moved slowly, his uniform crisp but worn, a reflection of years of work. He looked up at the sky for a moment, as though admiring the stars that were barely visible above the city lights. "Cold night," he remarked, rubbing his hands together. "Yeah," Joshua said, his voice flat. The man leaned against the railing, leaving a comfortable distance between them. He didn't speak right away, and Joshua appreciated the silence. It was a relief to be near someone who wasn't trying to pry or judge. "You don't look like you're enjoying the party much," the man said eventually, his tone conversational. Joshua let out a dry laugh. "Not exactly." The man nodded, as though he had expected that answer. "These big events can be overwhelming. Lot of noise, lot of people pretending to be something they're not." Joshua glanced at him, surprised by the observation. "You don't seem like the type to care much for parties." The man chuckled. "You're right about that. I've been working here for years, though, so I've seen my fair share. It's funny, isn't it? All these people dressed up, trying so hard to impress each other. But at the end of the day, they're just people, same as the rest of us." Joshua nodded slowly. "Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Feels like every mistake is magnified, like everyone's waiting for you to fail." The man studied him for a moment, his expression kind but thoughtful. "That's a heavy burden to carry," he said. "But you know, failure isn't the end. It's just a chance to learn, to grow. The real failure is giving up." Joshua looked back out at the city, the man's words echoing in his mind. "That's easy to say when you're not the one under the spotlight." "Maybe," the man admitted. "But I've seen enough to know that the spotlight doesn't mean much. It's how you treat people, how you carry yourself when no one's watching, that's what matters." Joshua remained silent, his thoughts churning. He thought of his father, of the lessons he had tried to teach him. Integrity, humility, respect, values that had built their empire, values he had lost sight of in his pursuit of success. "I used to work at one of your family's restaurants," the man said, breaking the silence. "Years ago, back when your father was still running things." Joshua turned to him, surprised. You did? The man nodded. I was a dishwasher. Hard work, long hours, but your father, he treated everyone with respect. He knew our names, asked about our families. Made us feel like we mattered. That's rare, you know. A pang of guilt shot through Joshua. His father's legacy was one of connection, of building something greater than himself. And yet here he was, letting it all crumble under the weight of his ego and ambition. He always said the same thing, the man continued. The true measure of a person isn't what they own, but how they make others feel. I never forgot that. Joshua swallowed hard, his throat tight. The man's words cut through the noise in his mind, piercing the layers of doubt and pride that had clouded his judgment. I think I lost sight of that, Joshua admitted, his voice quiet. The man smiled, a warm, understanding expression. We all lose our way sometimes. The important thing is finding it again. Joshua nodded, his chest heavy but lighter than it had been moments before. For the first time that evening, he felt a flicker of clarity, a faint but steady sense of resolve. Thank you, he said, meeting the man's eyes. The man patted him on the shoulder. Don't thank me, sir. Just remember what matters. With that, he turned and headed back inside, leaving Joshua alone once more. The cold air bit at his skin, but Joshua barely noticed. He looked out at the skyline, his thoughts racing. He had spent so much time trying to maintain an image, to protect his pride, that he had forgotten what truly mattered. The people in that ballroom weren't his enemies, even if they judged him. Clarissa wasn't an obstacle, she was a reminder of what could happen when trust and ambition collided. And he wasn't defined by his failures. For the first time in months, Joshua felt a spark of hope. The damage wasn't irreversible. He still had time to set things right, to rebuild what he had lost, not just his business, but himself. With a deep breath, he turned and headed back toward the ballroom. The warmth of the party hit him as he stepped inside, but he didn't flinch. His next move was clear. It was time to face the crowd, to face Clarissa, and to reclaim not just his reputation, but his integrity. Joshua stepped back into the ballroom, the heavy warmth of the room hitting him like a wave. The murmur of conversations and the steady rhythm of the jazz band filled the space, blending into a cacophony of noise that seemed to amplify the pounding in his chest. The terrace's cold clarity was gone, replaced by the suffocating air of expectation. He scanned the room, his eyes instinctively searching for Clarissa. She stood near the stage, her poise as unshakable as ever. She was surrounded by a small group of influential guests, their laughter a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Joshua. Her calculated betrayal replayed in his mind, the precision of her words cutting deep. Yet now, instead of anger or humiliation, he felt something else, resolve. His conversation with the older man had shifted something within him. The man's quiet wisdom, rooted in years of hard work and humility, had reminded Joshua of the values he had let slip away. His father's legacy wasn't about appearances or power plays, it was about integrity, respect, and the relationships he had built. Joshua took a deep breath, steadying himself. The path forward was clear. He had to reclaim his narrative, not through denial or deflection, but through honesty. If he was going to rebuild his empire, he needed to start by rebuilding trust, with the people in this room and with himself. The chatter around him was a low hum, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the clinking of glasses. He caught snippets of conversations as he moved through the crowd, each one a reminder of the stakes. Did you hear what Clarissa said earlier? Bold, wasn't it? I always thought Joshua had it all together. Guess appearances can be deceiving. I wouldn't count him out just yet. He's always been good at bouncing back. Joshua clenched his fists briefly before releasing them. Their words stung, but they were also true. He had relied on appearances for too long, avoiding the hard truths that now stared him in the face. As he approached the center of the room, the band finished their current piece, and the crowd applauded. The sudden lull in the music created a natural pause, and Joshua seized the moment. He stepped toward the stage, his steps deliberate. The murmurs in the room began to die down as people noticed him. Clarissa, standing near the microphone, turned to face him. For a brief second, their eyes met, and he saw a flicker of something in her expression, surprise, perhaps even unease. She stepped back, allowing him to take her place. The room fell silent as Joshua took the microphone. The weight of hundreds of eyes on him was almost crushing, but he stood tall. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I won't keep you long, but there's something I need to say." The crowd was still, their attention fully on him. "Tonight is a night for celebration," he continued. "A time to reflect on the past year and look ahead to the future. And like many of you, I've been doing a lot of reflecting." He paused, scanning the room. He could see the curiosity, the skepticism, and the faint glimmers of support in the faces before him. "This past year has been one of the most challenging of my life," he admitted. "I made decisions, some of them good, some of them bad. And those bad decisions have had consequences, not just for me, but for the people who have trusted me, worked with me, and believed in me." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but Joshua pressed on. "For a long time, I thought leadership was about strength, about always knowing the right answer and never showing weakness. But tonight, I've realized something important. True leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest." The murmurs quieted, replaced by a sense of focused attention. "I've made mistakes," Joshua said, his voice firm. "Big ones. And I take full responsibility for them. I won't stand here and make excuses or shift the blame. Instead, I want to promise you this: I am committed to making things right. To rebuilding trust, not just in my business, but in myself." He paused, letting his words settle. The room was so quiet that he could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. "I know that trust isn't earned through words alone," he said. "It's earned through actions. And I intend to spend the coming year proving to all of you that I can do better, that I can lead with integrity, and that I can honor the legacy my father worked so hard to build." A faint ripple of applause began, hesitant at first but growing stronger. Joshua's chest tightened, a mix of relief and determination flooding through him. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he concluded, his voice steady. "For your support, your patience, and your belief in the future. Because together, I know we can achieve great things." He stepped back from the microphone, the applause swelling around him. It wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine, and that was enough. As he descended from the stage, a few guests approached him, their expressions warmer than before. "Well said, Joshua," one man remarked, offering a firm handshake. "Honesty suits you," another added, a faint smile on her lips. Joshua nodded, accepting their words with quiet gratitude. He didn't expect everyone to be won over immediately, but this was a start, a first step toward rebuilding what had been broken. Clarissa stood off to the side, watching him with an inscrutable expression. He approached her, his gaze steady. "You didn't have to do it this way," he said quietly, his tone devoid of anger. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "And you didn't have to handle it the way you did. But I'll admit, I'm impressed." Joshua studied her for a moment, trying to discern her true feelings. But he realized it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had taken control of his story, his future. The clock struck midnight, and the room erupted into cheers as fireworks lit up the sky outside. Glasses clinked, confetti fell, and the atmosphere transformed into one of celebration. Joshua stepped to the edge of the room, watching the colorful explosions through the windows. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity, a glimmer of hope. This wasn't the end, it was a new beginning, and this time, he intended to do it right. The ballroom buzzed with life as the clock inched closer to midnight. The cheers from Joshua's speech still lingered faintly in the air, mixing with renewed conversations and bursts of laughter. For many of the guests, his admission of failure and commitment to change was a surprising yet admirable turn, and the atmosphere shifted toward cautious optimism. Joshua stood near the edge of the room, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The weight he had carried for months had begun to lift, but it wasn't gone entirely. The night wasn't over, and neither was his journey. Guests passed by him with polite nods, offering words of encouragement or measured praise. "Took a lot of guts to say what you did up there," one man said, patting him on the shoulder. Not many would have done it. Joshua nodded, thanking him. He appreciated the kindness, but he knew there were still skeptics in the crowd, people who saw his speech as nothing more than damage control. Earning their trust would take time and consistent action, something he was prepared to deliver. As he moved through the room, his thoughts turned to Clarissa. She had remained quiet since his speech, her expression unreadable as she observed him from a distance. He knew she was calculating her next move, weighing the impact of his words against her carefully laid plans. Finally, their paths crossed near the bar. Clarissa was leaning casually against the counter, a glass of champagne in her hand. She smiled as he approached, but it wasn't the warm, genuine smile of a friend. It was a mask, one he had seen many times before. "Well," she said, her voice smooth, "that was unexpected." Joshua met her gaze, his expression calm. Sometimes the unexpected is exactly what's needed. She tilted her head, studying him. "I'll admit, you handled yourself well. Better than I expected, actually. I thought you might crumble under the pressure." "Maybe I would have," Joshua said, surprising even himself with his honesty. "But then I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation, I was fighting for the values that built this company, the values my father believed in." Clarissa's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "And do you think that speech fixed everything?" "No," Joshua said firmly. "It was just the beginning. I still have a lot to prove, and not just to the people in this room, to myself." Her gaze softened slightly, but her walls remained intact. "You've got a long road ahead of you, Joshua. And not everyone will be as forgiving as they were tonight." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking for a chance to show them I've learned from my mistakes." Clarissa took a sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving his. "We'll see," she said finally, her tone neutral. "Good luck, Joshua. You'll need it." As she walked away, Joshua felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. Clarissa had been a crucial part of his journey, but their paths were diverging now, and he didn't know if they would ever truly align again. The band struck up a celebratory tune, drawing his attention back to the room. Couples danced with renewed energy, their movements light and carefree. It was a stark contrast to the heaviness Joshua had felt all evening, and for a moment, he envied their ability to lose themselves in the music that he turned toward the stage, his mind racing. The speech had been a pivotal moment, but he couldn't stop there. He needed to engage with the people who mattered most, those who had supported him through thick and thin, as well as those whose trust he had lost. Spotting a familiar face near the far end of the room, he made his way over. It was Daniel, one of his oldest investors and a close friend of his late father. Daniel's expression was warm but guarded, his eyes scanning Joshua as though trying to read his intentions. "Daniel," Joshua said, extending a hand. "Joshua," Daniel replied, shaking his hand firmly. "That was quite the speech. Took a lot of courage to say what you did." "Thank you," Joshua said, his tone sincere. "I meant every word." Daniel nodded, his expression softening. "I believe you. But you have to understand, words are just the beginning. Actions speak louder, and I'll be watching closely to see if you follow through." "You have every right to," Joshua said. "And I'll do everything I can to earn back your trust, not just for the business, but for what it stands for." Daniel studied him for a moment before nodding. "Your father would be proud of what you said tonight. He believed in second chances, and I think you've earned one." The words hit Joshua like a lifeline, and he felt a swell of gratitude. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know." They exchanged a few more words before parting ways, and Joshua felt a renewed sense of purpose. He continued making his way through the room, engaging with guests, listening to their concerns, and offering his vision for the future. As he spoke, he noticed a shift in the energy around him. People were beginning to see him not as a man who had stumbled, but as one who was determined to rise again. The skepticism in their eyes was replaced by cautious optimism, and he felt the weight of their belief beginning to settle on his shoulders. The clock struck 11:55, and a hush fell over the room as the band slowed their tempo. The crowd gathered near the massive windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline, their faces alight with anticipation. Joshua stood at the edge of the group, his gaze fixed on the city. The fireworks would start soon, marking the beginning of a new year and, for him, a new chapter. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Clarissa. "Midnight's almost here," she said, her voice soft. "It is," Joshua replied, his tone even. "For what it's worth," she said, hesitating for the first time all evening, "I hope you mean what you said tonight." "I do," he said simply. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good luck, Joshua." As the countdown began, the room erupted with energy. 10, 9, 8, Joshua joined the chant, his voice steady, his heart pounding with anticipation. 3, 2, 1. The first explosion of fireworks lit up the sky, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the ballroom. Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. Joshua watched the display, a quiet smile on his lips. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready to face it. This wasn't just the start of a new year, it was the start of something far more meaningful. And as the fireworks painted the sky with light, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with honesty, courage, and the unwavering belief that redemption was possible. As the fireworks exploded over Manhattan, the crowd in the ballroom erupted into cheers, laughter, and clinking glasses. The energy was electric, the atmosphere jubilant, but for Joshua, it felt like standing on the edge of something monumental. The weight of the past year had not disappeared, but the possibilities of the year ahead now glimmered with the same brilliance as the lights in the sky. That he stepped back from the window, letting the guests enjoy the spectacle. His heart was still pounding from the intensity of the evening. The speech he had delivered was a turning point, but the hard work was only just beginning. Every step forward would need to be deliberate, honest, and reflective of the man he wanted to become, not the man he had been. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Joshua?" He turned to find a familiar face, Margaret, a longtime employee of the Prescott family's restaurant empire. She was older now, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes still held the warmth and loyalty he remembered from his childhood. She had been one of the first managers his father had hired, a steadfast presence through the company's meteoric rise. "Margaret," he said, his tone softening. "It's been too long." "It has," she replied with a small smile. "I wasn't sure you'd recognize me after all these years." "Of course I do," Joshua said sincerely. "You were one of my father's most trusted people. He always spoke so highly of you." Her smile widened, but there was a hint of sadness in her expression. "Your father was a remarkable man. He built something truly special, not just a business, but a family." Joshua nodded, his chest tightening. "I've been thinking about him a lot tonight. About everything he stood for." Margaret placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "You've had a difficult year, Joshua. But your father believed in second chances, in learning from our mistakes. And I think tonight you've started to show that same resilience." Her words struck a chord, and Joshua felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Margaret. That means a lot coming from you." She gave his arm a reassuring squeeze before moving on, leaving him with her words echoing in his mind. The ballroom was still alive with celebration, but the energy had shifted. Conversations felt lighter, more hopeful, as though the speech and the fireworks had cast a spell of optimism over the guests. Joshua moved through the room, pausing to speak with small groups of people. Each interaction was a chance to rebuild trust, to show that he was serious about the promises he had made. He listened intently to their concerns, acknowledged their frustrations, and outlined his vision for the future. One guest, an investor named Caroline, approached him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You've certainly had an eventful evening, Joshua," she said, her tone measured. "I have," he admitted. "But I think it was necessary." Caroline studied him for a moment. "You know, when Clarissa gave her speech, I thought it might be the end for you. But then you surprised everyone. Joshua met her gaze. I meant what I said up there. This isn't about saving face, it's about doing what's right, even if it's uncomfortable. Her expression softened. Well, I'll admit, I didn't expect that kind of honesty. If you can back it up with action, you might just turn things around. That's the plan, he said, offering a faint smile. As she walked away, Joshua felt a glimmer of hope. Slowly but surely, he was beginning to mend the fractures that had threatened to bring everything down. Clarissa, meanwhile, stood near the edge of the room, observing him from afar. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of composure that gave nothing away. But Joshua could feel her watching, her presence a constant reminder of the betrayal that had brought him to this point. That he made his way toward her, his steps deliberate. When he reached her, she turned to face him, her smile faint but polite. Enjoying the fireworks, she asked, her tone light. They're impressive, Joshua replied. But I think the real show was in here tonight. Clarissa tilted her head, her gaze sharp. You handled yourself well. I'll give you that. I didn't do it for you, he said evenly. I did it for the people who still believe in me, and for the people I let down. Her smile wavered, but she quickly recovered. You've certainly given them something to talk about. Joshua took a deep breath, his voice softening. Clarissa, I don't know what you hope to accomplish tonight, but I'm not angry anymore. If anything, I'm grateful. You forced me to confront the truth, and that's something I needed to do. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, regret, perhaps, or uncertainty. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You've always been resilient, Joshua. That's one of the reasons I admired you. Then maybe we can start over, he said, extending a hand. Not as enemies, but as two people who want what's best for the company. Clarissa hesitated, then took his hand. Her grip was firm, but her expression remained guarded. We'll see, she said simply. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step forward. As the night wore on, Joshua felt a growing sense of clarity. The weight of the past year was still there, but it no longer felt insurmountable. He had faced his fears, owned his mistakes, and made a commitment to change. When the final song of the night played, Joshua stood near the center of the room, watching as guests slowly began to disperse. The energy had shifted once again, from celebration to reflection. People exchanged hugs and handshakes, their conversations filled with promises to reconnect in the coming year. Joshua smiled faintly as he watched them. This was the beginning of something new, not just for him, but for everyone in that room. He turned toward the windows one last time, the city light stretching out before him like a map of endless possibilities. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. And as the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon, Joshua knew one thing for certain: this was a New Year's Eve he would never forget. The echoes of the final song faded as the last guests began to leave the ballroom. The once vibrant room, filled with laughter, conversation, and music, now carried a quieter energy, a mix of exhaustion and reflection. The lingering scent of champagne and roses hung in the air, mingling with the faint hum of the city outside. Joshua stood by one of the grand windows, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The fireworks had ended, and now the city lights flickered steadily, a reminder of the constancy beneath the chaos. Behind him, staff moved gracefully, collecting empty glasses and folding table linens, resetting the room for whatever event would follow this one. He let out a long breath, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. His speech had been a turning point, he knew that much. But now came the real challenge. Words could inspire, but actions would define him. As the quiet settled around him, the gravity of the moment began to sink in. Still here, I see, a voice said, breaking his thoughts. He turned to see Daniel approaching, his tie loosened and his glass of whiskey nearly empty. The older man carried himself with the same quiet authority Joshua had always admired, a presence that demanded respect without seeking it. I needed a moment, Joshua replied, gesturing to the view. Tonight was a lot. Daniel nodded, joining him by the window. It always is. Nights like this have a way of stripping things down to what really matters. Joshua chuckled softly, shaking his head. And what do you think really matters, Daniel? The older man considered the question, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Honesty. Integrity. The ability to own up to your mistakes and learn from them. That's what separates the ones who last from the ones who burn out. I'm trying, Joshua said, his voice quiet but firm. I can see that, Daniel replied. But don't get comfortable. Tonight was a good first step, but only a step. You've got a long road ahead, and not everyone will be as forgiving as the people in this room. I know, Joshua said, glancing back at the city. But I'm ready for it. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Joshua's shoulder. Good. Because you've got more to fight for than just your business. Your father left you a legacy, Joshua. Don't let it slip through your fingers. Joshua nodded, the weight of those words settling over him. Daniel offered a small smile before turning and heading for the door, leaving Joshua alone once more. As the ballroom continued to empty, Joshua made his way toward the stage. The microphone still stood at its center, a silent witness to the night's pivotal moments. He ran his fingers along its smooth metal surface, replaying his speech in his mind. It had been raw and unpolished, but it had been real, not bad for a man under pressure. Joshua turned to see Clarissa standing a few feet away, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. She had shed some of her earlier confidence, her expression softer now, less guarded. Clarissa, he said, his tone even. I wasn't sure you'd still be here. She shrugged, stepping closer. I thought I'd stay and see how you were handling things. You've been through the ringer tonight. Joshua smirked faintly. That's one way to put it. She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. You surprised me, you know. I didn't think you'd be able to pull off that speech, let alone turn the room around. I didn't do it to impress anyone, Joshua said, meeting her eyes. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Something I should have done a long time ago. Clarissa tilted her head, her lips curving into a small smile. Maybe I underestimated you. Or maybe you wanted me to fail, he replied, his voice steady. The smile faltered, and for the first time that evening, Clarissa looked uncomfortable. Joshua, you don't have to explain, he said, cutting her off gently. I get it. You saw an opportunity, and you took it. But what I said earlier still stands. We don't have to be enemies, Clarissa. There's enough room for both of us to succeed, if we're willing to work together. Her expression softened further, and she nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe we can make this work. Good, Joshua said. Because I'm done letting pride and ambition get in the way of what really matters. They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them finally easing. Clarissa offered a small nod before turning and walking away, leaving Joshua with a sense of closure he hadn't expected. As the final guests departed and the staff finished tidying the room, Joshua lingered. He needed this moment, this pause before the work truly began. The past year had tested him in ways he never anticipated, and while tonight had been a step forward, he knew the road ahead would be filled with more challenges, but this time, he was ready. He made his way toward the doors, pausing to thank the staff as he left. The cool night air greeted him as he stepped outside, the noise of the city a comforting hum in the background. As he walked down the steps of the hotel, he glanced up at the skyline one last time. The stars were barely visible, but the lights of the city shone brightly, a symbol of resilience and hope. Joshua smiled faintly, his breath visible in the cold air. This was the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild, to grow, and to honor the legacy his father had entrusted to him. He slid his hands into his pockets and began walking, each step carrying him closer to the man he wanted to become. The new year stretched out before him like an open road, filled with uncertainty but also possibility. And for the first time in a long time, Joshua felt ready to embrace it all. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your favorite part in the comments below. Your support means so much to us. See you in the next video.